$10, Warren said quietly. I'll buy her. The auction yard went still for a heartbeat, as if the heat itself had flinched. A moment before, the place had been all noise and dust, men shouting over one another, boots thudding on warped planks, the auctioneer's voice cracking as he tried to wring one more dollar from a crowd already half drunk on sweat and cruelty. Now every eye slid from the girl on the platform to the man who'd spoken. She stood barefoot on the rough boards, wrists bound, a strip of faded cloth hanging off one shoulder. Her skin was the color of sun-browned earth. Her hair, a black curtain tangled by rough hands. But her gaze was the only thing that didn't look broken, dark, steady. It met the crowd like a challenge they did not deserve. Warren didn't look at their faces. His eyes were fixed on the small black mark inked into her bare shoulder, and the way his jaw clenched said he had seen it once before, in another place, on another dying day. Before we continue the story, take a moment to comment below and tell me where you're watching from and why Wild West love stories speak to you. Your thoughts help this tale reach the folks who truly feel its heartbeat. The sun over Willow Bend burned white and merciless, flattening every color into dust and heat. From the ridge overlooking town, the land unfurled into Black Willow Basin, a stretch of dry grass and scattered trees charred by old lightning strikes. The air smelled of hot iron and old smoke, and even the wind moved slow, as if burdened by the long miles of desert it had crossed. Warren Hale rode through it without hurry, the worn leather of his saddle creaking beneath him, his hat pulled low to shield his eyes. He had lived in this basin long enough to read the silence, long enough to know when a day would go wrong before it began. His life at Black Willow Ranch was a quiet one, shaped by long days of mending fences, tending cattle, and the heaviness that came from being the kind of man who spoke little and remembered too much. The people of Willow Bend kept their distance. Some said he carried trouble in his shadow. Others whispered about the scar carved deep along his ribs, a wound he never explained. Warren didn't correct them. Solitude fit him better than conversation ever had. But as he brought the girl from the auction back toward his horse, the world around him shifted. Ahalani walked with a limp. The rope burns on her wrists raw and angry, yet she did not ask for help. Her steps were uncertain from exhaustion, but her spine did not bend. The way she glanced at the street corners, at the people who hovered with the same mix of curiosity and disdain, told Warren she had been hunted before. The way she angled her body away from him told him she expected betrayal as easily as breath. Up close, her appearance held a quiet, battered dignity. The cut along her cheek had dried to a thin line of rust. Her hair clung to her neck in wind-blown tangles, and her clothes, once part of a ceremonial dress, hung torn around her knees. Yet her eyes never lowered. They moved with sharp intent, taking in the alleys, the horses, the escape routes. She was afraid, but she was not defeated. Warren sensed something in her stillness. A person didn't learn to be that calm under threat unless life had demanded it again and again. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse, threaded with dust, but steady. There was no pleading in it, only control, as if she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of hearing her tremble. He didn't ask where she came from. The basin already held too many stories written in ash-burned villages. Gunsmoke drifting through canyons. People pushed from the lands that once held their ancestors. Apache, Comanche. It didn't matter to Willow Bend. They had turned distrust into a habit. But Warren knew better than to measure people by the fear of a town that barely understood itself. Still, that small black mark on her shoulder gnawed at him. A spiraled bird. Wings curling upward, he had seen it once on a man who saved his life when every sign said he should have been left to die. The memory pressed behind his ribs like a bruise waiting to surface. Ahalani finally looked at him, really looked, as if trying to place him within her own bruised world. There was no warmth in her gaze, but no hatred either, only the exhausted instinct of someone who had learned that trust was a luxury. Warren tightened his hold on the reins and started toward the open road. Whatever waited ahead, answers, danger, or the truth behind that inked mark, they would face it in the vast silence of Black Willow Basin, where secrets had room to breathe and past debts refused to stay buried. They reached Black Willow Ranch near sundown. The sky bruised purple above the basin. The old cabin sat low against the wind, its porch sagging slightly, its windows catching the last thin streaks of gold. Warren dismounted first, tying his horse to the post with the unhurried motions of a man used to quiet evenings and predictable chores. Nothing in his life had prepared him for the girl now standing at the edge of his porch, staring at the door as if it might bite. Ahalani did not move until he stepped aside, giving her space to enter without passing too close to him. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold with the wary grace of a wild animal deciding, for a moment, not to flee. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar smoke and iron pots long warmed by the fire. Warren lit the lantern, its glow blooming softly across the rough-hewn walls. She stayed close to the door. Her fingers hovered near the small bone-handled knife tucked beneath the torn fabric at her hip. Warren noticed the gesture but said nothing. She had every right to defend herself. The world had taught her that much. "You're safe here," he said. His voice was low, almost careful, as if he were speaking to the air rather than to her. Ahalani's eyes lifted, dark and steady. They carried the sharpness of someone deciding which truth to believe. "Safe," she repeated, but it sounded more like she was testing the word than accepting it. Warren set a tin cup on the table and filled it with water. He didn't push it toward her. He simply stepped back, palms open, letting her choose. After a long moment, she crossed the room and took it, the way she drank small sips. Each one measured told him she'd been rationing water for days. Silence settled, thick but not hostile. Outside, the wind scraped along the dry grass and sent loose dust against the windows like a soft tapping. Inside, the fire in the hearth snapped once, then quieted. "You didn't have to buy me," she said finally. Her tone was flat, but beneath it lay a tremor she fought hard to hide. "No," Warren answered. "I didn't." He didn't explain further, and she didn't press. Between them lay the unspoken truth: she had no reason to trust him, and he had no right to demand it. Her gaze drifted to the old coat hanging by the door, then to the cracked leather boots beneath it, then to the rifle mounted high on the wall. She was mapping the room, counting exits, judging distances. He recognized the behavior. Years ago, in a canyon far from this one, he had done the same. Finally, she asked, "What do you want?" Warren looked at her, not the torn clothing or the dirt on her skin, but the hard-earned composure, the refusal to bow. "I want you to rest," he said. "Nothing more tonight." The answer seemed to disarm her more than any threat could have. She blinked, as if thrown off balance by its simplicity. There was a long pause before she spoke again, softer this time. My sister, she murmured. Her name is Kaya. He didn't move, but something in him tightened. A beginning, a direction. Ahalani turned toward the lantern light, and for the first time Warren saw something other than fear or defiance in her eyes. Something raw, like hope pressed thin against grief. "Help me find her," she said. Not a demand, not a plea, a quiet line drawn between two lives. Warren nodded once, slow and certain, outside. The basin swallowed the last of the daylight, and the dark pressed close around the cabin. But inside, for the first time, there was a sense that the night had shifted, carrying with it the fragile beginning of an unlikely alliance. They left before dawn, when Black Willow Basin was still a blue-gray hush, and the world felt softer, as if grief had not yet remembered its place. Warren saddled the horses while Ahalani stood near the porch steps, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She did not shiver. She simply watched the horizon with the stillness of someone who had spent many nights waiting for danger to find her first. He handed her a blanket for the ride. She hesitated before taking it, fingers brushing his only for a breath. The contact was brief, but enough for both of them to feel the unfamiliar weight of a connection neither had expected nor asked for. She mounted without assistance, her movements sure despite exhaustion. He admired that in silence. As they rode into the basin, the sun crept upward, spilling pale gold over the scrub and scattered blackened willows. Ahalani took the lead when the trail narrowed between two ridges. She pointed to small things Warren might have missed: a broken twig, a patch of disturbed dirt, the faint imprint of a boot heel. Her voice was soft but steady, shaped by a certainty born from years of reading land the way others read scripture. "You see the dust here?" she asked, crouching beside a shallow depression in the earth. More than one horse. They were moving fast. Warren knelt beside her. The mark was nearly invisible to him, but the focus in her eyes left no room for doubt. He watched her, not the ground. "You're good at this," he said. "It's what my father taught us," she replied. The way she said it carried a quiet ache, like the ghost of a memory brushing her ribs. He didn't ask more. Instead, he said, "We'll get Kaya back." She didn't look at him, but her fingers closed slightly tighter around the dirt, as if holding on to the promise. By midday, the heat settled low and heavy across the basin. They stopped beneath a rock ledge to drink from the canteen. Ahalani stepped into the shade, pressing her palm to her forehead. Warren noticed how her breathing had grown shallow. "You're pushing too hard," he said. "We don't have time to rest," she answered. He unscrewed the lid and held the canteen toward her. "We won't save her if you collapse." For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she reached out, her hand brushing his again. This time, she didn't pull away so quickly. As she drank, he watched the tension in her shoulders ease, though only a fraction. "Thank you," she said quietly. Warren's throat tightened in a way he hadn't expected. "You don't owe me that. I'm not saying it because I owe you." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was something gentler, a space where two wounded lives briefly rested side by side. They continued north toward Ghost Timber Hollow as the afternoon deepened. The closer they came, the more the land changed. Trees burned from an old wildfire rose like black bones against the sky. The wind carried the sharp scent of ash that never quite faded, even years after the flames had gone. Ahalani pulled her horse to a stop at the edge of the hollow. Her gaze swept the darkness between the charred trunks, searching for movement. Warren rode up beside her, close enough that their knees nearly touched. "She's here," Ahalani whispered. "I can feel it." He didn't ask how she knew. Some truths did not need proof. When she turned toward him, her eyes weren't hard the way they had been in Willow Bend. There was something new, something fragile and fearful, not of the danger ahead, but of the possibility of failing the one person she still had left in the world. Warren reached down and gently covered her hand with his. "We'll do this together." Ahalani didn't pull away. She held on, just enough. In that moment, beneath the blackened trees and the weight of the coming danger, a small, quiet certainty took root between them, unspoken but unmistakable. They were no longer just a man and a woman thrown together by chance. They were becoming something steadier, forged not by safety, but by shared fear, shared purpose, and the fragile beginnings of trust. Ghost Timber Hollow waited in a breathless stillness, the charred tree trunks rising like black pillars around a clearing stained by old fire. Warren and Ahalani tied their horses behind a ridge of scorched rock and continued the last stretch on foot, the ash beneath their boots whispering with every step. Ahalani moved first, her body low, her hands steady despite the tremor Warren sensed beneath her calm. He followed close, watching the way she paused to listen, how her breath shortened each time the wind shifted. They reached the top of a narrow incline overlooking the hollow. Below, a small camp flickered with weak firelight. 3 bedrolls lay scattered near the flames. A 4th man sat on a crate, cleaning his boots with the bored confidence of someone who believed danger could never reach him. And to the left, tied to a charred stump, was Kaya. Her head hung low, her dark hair veiling her face, but the slight movement of her shoulders told Ahalani she was alive. Ahalani exhaled sharply, her hand gripping Warren's sleeve. He felt the shiver in her fingers before she forced herself to let go. He leaned close enough that she could hear him even in a whisper. "We do this slow. No noise, unless we must." She nodded, though her eyes stayed locked on Kaya. They slipped around the ridge, using the ruined trees as cover. Warren counted 3 men asleep, 1 awake, 4 total. But shape shifted deeper in the shadows, and he couldn't be sure whether others had wandered off to hunt or drink. It didn't matter. They had this one chance. From the far side of the hollow, Ahalani crept toward a cluster of fallen logs. Warren circled the opposite direction toward Kaya. Their plan was simple. She would draw the standing guard's attention just long enough for Warren to cut Kaya loose. Then they would slip back into the trees before the camp stirred. Ahalani lifted a small stone and flicked it into the darkness. It clattered against a stump. The guard jerked his head up. Another stone followed, bouncing farther. He stood, muttering, and walked toward the sound. Warren exhaled, then moved. He reached Kaya in seconds. Up close, he could see her wrists were rubbed raw, her lips cracked from thirst. "Kaya," he whispered. Her eyelids fluttered. "I'm getting you out." Her voice was a thread. "Aha, Lonnie, she's here," he said. "Hold still." The rope gave way beneath his knife. Warren slid an arm around her waist to steady her. She tried to stand, but her knees buckled. He tightened his grip, lifting her quietly. Then the voice came sharp, suspicious. "Who's there?" The guard had turned too soon. He stared into the dark, then spotted movement near Kaya's stump. The silence broke like glass. Warren lifted Kaya fully and stepped back, shielding her. Ahalani emerged behind the guard, silent as wind cutting through grass. Her knife flashed once across his arm as he whirled to face the wrong direction. He shouted, stumbling toward the fire. The sleeping men jerked awake. One reached for his pistol. Warren drew and fired before the man cleared leather. The shot cracked through the hollow. echoing off the burned trunks. Kaya flinched in his arms. A second man lunged toward Ahalani. She pivoted beneath his grasp, cutting low across his thigh. He collapsed with a howl. The last man fired wildly at the shadows. The bullet struck the stump behind Warren, splintering old wood. He dropped to one knee, bracing Kaya behind him, and fired once. The man staggered backward, hit the ground hard, and did not rise. Breathing hard, Warren scanned the clearing. No more movement, no more voices, only the crackle of the dying fire and the echo of their heartbeats filling the night. Ahalani rushed to Kaya, dropping to her knees. "Kaya," she whispered, hands trembling now that the danger had passed. Kaya leaned into her, weak but alive. Ahalani pressed her forehead to her sister's, a sob escaping her chest before she could stop it. Warren let them have that moment. His arm throbbed where a bullet had grazed him. He hadn't noticed the burn until the fight ended. Blood seeped through his sleeve. When Ahalani looked up and saw it, her breath caught. "You're hurt." Her voice cracked in a way that shook him more than the wound did. "It's nothing," he said. But she was yet already moving toward him, one hand steadying Kaya, the other reaching for his arm with a tenderness that startled him. Her fingers brushed his skin, and the night seemed to narrow to the warmth of her touch. She looked at him with something raw, something neither of them had dared acknowledge until now. "You risked your life," she whispered. Warren held her gaze. "I'd do it again." The words were simple, but in the hollow filled with ash and moonlight, they carried the weight of a vow neither had planned to make. The ride back to Black Willow Ranch was slow, careful, and quiet. Kaya lay slumped against Warren's back, her arms loosely wrapped around his waist, breathing in uneven threads. Ahalani rode beside them, one hand guiding her horse, the other hovering near her sister, as if afraid Kaya might vanish the moment she blinked. The basin stretched pale beneath the moon, its grasses whispering in the wind like tired voices. Every now and then, Warren glanced at the two sisters, one barely conscious, the other holding herself together with a strength that looked dangerously close to breaking. They reached the ranch just as the sky began to gray. Warren carried Kaya inside and laid her gently on the narrow bed closest to the hearth. Ahalani knelt beside her, brushing away the dust and ash clinging to Kaya's cheek. When Warren stepped away to fetch water, he caught Ahalani's gaze dark, watchful, and softer than he had ever seen it. She said nothing, only nodded once, as if acknowledging something unspoken between them. He cleaned the wound on Kaya's ankle, tightened the blankets around her, and placed a cup of water within her reach for when she woke. The cabin was warm now, firelight pushing back the cold. Ahalani sat on the floor beside the bed, her back against the wall, eyes fixed on her sister's breathing. Warren knelt next to her, close enough for his shoulder to brush hers if either of them shifted. "She'll recover," he murmured. Ahalani nodded, but the tremor in her breath betrayed her exhaustion. "I thought I'd lost her." "You didn't." Silence settled again, but it was different this time, less guarded, less sharp. The danger had passed, leaving behind only the fragile aftermath of fear and relief tangled together. Warren rose and brought her a cup of tea brewed from herbs he kept for cold nights. She took it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. "You saved her," she said quietly. "We saved her," he corrected. "I wouldn't have found her without you." Her eyes traced the lines of his face, tired, bruised, stained with dirt and dried blood from the fight. When she noticed the deeper wound on his arm, she set the tea aside. "Sit," she said. He didn't argue, She rolled up his sleeve with careful fingers, her touch light but sure. The wound wasn't deep, but seeing her tend to it stirred something deep in his chest, something that made the cabin feel too small, too warm. Ahalani dipped a cloth into warm water and pressed it gently to the exposed skin. He hissed at the sting, and her eyes flickered upward, soft with apology. "I didn't thank you," she said. "You don't have to. That is not why I say it." Her voice thinned, almost a whisper. "All my life I have had to guard myself. Tonight, you guarded me." He looked down at her, at the way the fire caught in her hair, turning black strands to copper. "I wasn't going to let anything happen to you." Wind brushed along the cabin walls, a long sigh of the basin settling into dawn. Kaya stirred in her sleep, and Ahalani's hand instinctively moved to her forehead. Warren watched the gesture, gentle yet fierce, and realized that the part of her she tried to protect most wasn't herself, but the people she loved. Hours passed. Kaya slept. Ahalani rested against the wall, eyelids lowering despite her efforts to stay alert. Warren draped a blanket around her shoulders. She startled slightly, then relaxed into its warmth. "You should rest," he said. "I am afraid I'll wake to find this was a dream." It wasn't. His voice stayed low, steady, as if anchoring her to the room. "You're safe here, both of you, for the first time." Her shoulders eased. She leaned her head back, breathing deeply. "When the fire burned through our village," she said softly, "I thought I would never feel safe again." Warren sat beside her on the floor, close but not touching, letting the fire crackle between their heartbeats. "Safe doesn't have to mean the past," he said. "Sometimes it's a place you build new." She turned to him then, eyes searching his, as if testing whether she could believe him. Whatever she found there made her breath steady. This place. He didn't smile, not fully, but something warm flickered across his expression. "If you want it to be." The quiet that followed was not the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of two people who understood each other in ways that did not need naming. In that small cabin, as dawn bloomed over Black Willow Basin, something shifted between them, subtle as a touch, certain as sunrise. When Kaya whispered her sister's name in her sleep, Ahalani rose to comfort her. Warren watched the tender scene, feeling something in him settle, something long wandering, finally finding a place to rest. Outside, the sky blushed pink, and the first light swept across the ridge. Inside, Warren and Ahalani remained close bound, not by obligation or fear, but by the beginnings of a connection forged in danger, deepened in quiet, and held together by the relief of having survived. By the time Kaya could stand on her own, the days had begun to warm, softening the sharp winds that usually tore across Black Willow Basin. Warren repaired the fence line that morning, driving fresh stakes into the earth while Ahalani walked slowly beside Kaya, guiding her careful steps. The girl was still thin, still pale from the days she'd spent tied in the hollow, but her laughter, light and breathy, returned in small pieces. Each time Warren heard it drift across the yard, he found his hands slowing, his breath easing. That afternoon, the sky grew wide and open, brushed with high clouds. A distant murmur of hooves trembled through the ground. Ahalani froze, turning instinctively toward the sound. Warren stepped outside, wiping the dust from his palms. From the ridge beyond the ranch, a group of riders emerged, Apache, their horses decorated with feathers that glinted in the sun, their silhouettes sharp against the horizon. They moved with a quiet dignity that made the wind seem to hold its breath. Kaya's fingers curled around her sister's arm. "Our people," she whispered, something in her voice wonder. Longing made Ahalani's chest tighten. Warren watched the sisters, then turned his gaze back to the approaching riders. The group halted near the well, their leader raising a hand in greeting. He was young, no older than Warren had been when the world first taught him fear, with long black hair tied back and eyes that burned with steady confidence. He dismounted with fluid grace, and when his gaze landed on Kaya, something softened. "My name is Talis," he said quietly. His voice carried the cadence of the plains, each word shaped by wind and distance. "We saw smoke from your chimney. We hoped for water. And perhaps news of the missing." Ahalani stepped forward. Kaya was taken. "We found her." Talis bowed his head with deep reverence. The ancestors were kind. His eyes drifted to Kaya again, filled with concern, and then something warmer. Kaya looked down, suddenly shy, her fingers twisting the hem of her borrowed dress. Warren noticed Ahalani watching the two of them closely, her expression shifting caution, recognition, then a quiet acceptance. He walked to stand beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Talis and his people stayed only a short while, long enough to rest their horses and share a few gentle words with Kaya. As the group prepared to leave, Talis lingered. Speaking softly to her, Kaya glanced at Ahalani, uncertainty flickering across her face. Ahalani approached them. "Go," she said, brushing a loose strand of hair from Kaya's cheek. "Your path is bigger than mine now." Kaya's eyes brimmed, but she nodded. She hugged her sister tightly, burying her face in Ahalani's shoulder. Warren looked away, giving them the dignity of their moment when Kaya finally pulled back. She turned to Warren. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with sincerity, "for saving us both." Warren placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Take care of yourself." "Kaya." Talis extended a hand to help her mount. Kaya took it, her movement slow but sure. When she settled on the horse, she cast one last look at Ahalani, soft, apologetic, hopeful, before the riders turned toward the ridge. The group moved like a river of dark silhouettes against the bright land, their forms growing smaller until they disappeared into the shimmer of distance. Ahalani stood watching them long after they vanished. Her braids swung lightly in the breeze, and her shoulders rose and fell with a quiet breath. The vastness of the basin stretched out before her, and for a brief moment, she looked unbearably alone. Warren stepped closer, slow enough that she could choose to move away. She didn't. When his hand touched her shoulder, she closed her eyes, not in pain, but in release, as if letting go of a weight she'd carried too long. "She will be safe," Warren said. Ahalani nodded. "She deserves a life that hasn't been burned to the ground." Her voice trembled, but held steady. The wind circled them, carrying the scent of warm grass. A halting sense of peace settled over the ranch, strange and fragile. Ahalani turned to face Warren fully. In her eyes he saw exhaustion, grief, and something else, something growing quietly, like a seed taking root in scorched soil. "This place," she whispered, glancing at the cabin. The grazing fence line, the worn path shaped by his boots. "It feels different now." Warren searched her face. "Because you're here." The words came simply, honest as daylight. She didn't answer at first, only looked at him with a softness that had not existed days before. Then she stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing to the warmth of shared breath. "What happens now?" she murmured. Warren's hand rose, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek, the gesture careful as a promise. Whatever you choose. Ahalani lifted her gaze to the wide basin, the sky stretching open like a page waiting for their story. The charred trees of Ghost Timber Hollow were behind them now, washed away by new wind and rising sun. She reached for Warren's hand, their fingers intertwined slowly, naturally, like they had been meant to find each other in the long quiet of the frontier. And as they stood together at the edge of Black Willow Ranch, the vast land unfurling before them, their silhouettes cast a single, steady shadow, rooted, unafraid, and ready for whatever horizon waited next.